We get addicted to stability, even when that stability is built on dysfunction. The job you hate, the relationship that quietly suffocates you, the version of yourself that no longer fits, these are the old frameworks. And when those begin to crumble, we panic. We call it loss. We call it destruction. We call it betrayal. But what if God is just clearing the ground? There's a strange paradox in divine construction. It often begins with demolition. That's uncomfortable, I know. Because when everything collapses, you're not handed blueprints. You're handed silence, rubble, questions. But destruction isn't the end, it's the beginning disguised as chaos. Think about any great structure, the old has to be removed before the new can rise. Spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, this principle is no different. We like to say things like God has a plan, but we assume that means comfort, clarity, progress. What if his plan involves dismantling every lie you've believed about yourself? Every illusion that made you play small? Every habit that kept you shackled to fear? That's not gentle. That's not polite. That's violent in its mercy. And that's what rebuilding requires. It's in those collapsing seasons when the job falls through, when the betrayal guts you, when the identity you built your life around suddenly vanishes, that the blueprint starts to appear. Not visually, not logically, but spiritually. It's the part of the process where God is saying you weren't meant to keep living in a structure that couldn't support your real self. And the trick: most people will try to salvage the wreckage. They'll tape together a relationship that expired years ago. They'll keep showing up to an identity that no longer fits their calling. They'll sweep the debris into the corner and pretend it's still home. But pretending doesn't rebuild you. Surrender does. You have to look at the ruins and admit it wasn't working. That's not weakness, that's strength. That's you stepping into alignment with something bigger than your ego. That's you realizing that maybe the collapse was permission. Permission to start again. Permission to be rebuilt from truth, not trauma. Psychologically, we resist collapse because it challenges our constructed identity. Who are you when you're not the provider? The achiever? The loyal one? When all those roles disappear, you're left with something terrifying yourself. Just you, raw, unfiltered, and yet that's the version God wants to work with, not the mask, not the role, you. And that's the point of the breakdown. It's an invitation to face yourself, to meet God not in the temple, but in the ashes. He doesn't wait until you're polished in to start rebuilding you. He meets you in the dust, in the mess, in the confusion. And he begins to draw new plans over the ruins of what you thought you had to be. You can't be rebuilt if you're still trying to revive what broke you. That's the harsh truth. But it's also liberating. Because when you stop clinging to the collapsed version of your life, you realize you're free. Free to imagine again. Free to dream again. Free to be who you were before the world told you to shrink. And yes, it will hurt. Let's not romanticize it. God's reconstruction projects are often silent. You'll feel abandoned. You'll question your faith. You'll want to go back to what's familiar, even if it's toxic. But if you can sit in the ruins long enough, something starts to whisper. A new rhythm, a new language, a new structure forming quietly inside of you. And when that structure rises piece by piece, decision by decision, prayer by prayer, you won't just be restored. You'll be reborn with new clarity, new strength, and a new refusal to live in anything that doesn't match your destiny. So if your world is falling apart, good, let it. That means the real building is about to begin. Collapse isn't the end, it's the sound of God making space. Don't resist the rubble. Respect it. Because that's where the future starts. You ever notice how silence terrifies people? Not just the absence of noise, but that deeper silence, the kind that shows up after everything collapses. After the betrayal. After the layoff. After the prayer that went unanswered. It's in that vacuum where you begin to hear what you've been avoiding, your own truth. And it's also in that space that God does his most precise work. But here's the catch: he doesn't shout. He doesn't force, he whispers. In a world addicted to distraction, speed, and superficial validation, the whisper of God feels like nothing. And that's why most people miss it. They're waiting for a burning bush, a lightning bolt, a booming voice. Meanwhile, God's voice sounds more like, let go. Trust me. Move now, simple, subtle, dangerous. See, when God starts rebuilding you, he doesn't start with the architecture of your public life. He starts with the foundation, the stuff no one sees, your patterns, your fears, the lies you tell yourself when no one's around. And that's uncomfortable, because it strips away every performance mask you've worn for survival. You think God's going to bless your facade. He's not in the business of validating illusions. He's interested in truth. And truth often comes through solitude, not applause. What I'm telling you is, during this process of divine reconstruction, you're going to be misunderstood. People will question your choices. They'll think you've lost your mind because they can't see the blueprint. God showed you in the quiet. They don't hear the whisper you're following, and that's okay. Rebuilding isn't democratic. It doesn't need votes of approval. It needs obedience. Quiet, stubborn, internal obedience to something deeper than logic. That's where character is forged. Not in the spotlight, in the shadows. In the hours where you could compromise but choose not to. In the decisions where you could return to what's easy but decide to risk becoming something more. That's the real work. It's not glamorous. There are no medals, just quiet milestones that change everything. Waking up and choosing peace instead of revenge. Speaking truth when silence would be more comfortable. Walking away when your ego wants to stay and be seen. Most people build their lives on validation, and that works until it doesn't. Until life breaks. Until people turn. Until the applause fades. Then you're forced to ask, what's left? What am I really made of? That's why. God allows the silence not to punish you, but to invite you to know yourself. Because you cannot be rebuilt from someone else's opinions. You can only be rebuilt from truth. And that truth starts in silence. And you'll know the rebuilding is working when the things that used to trigger you don't. When your need to be liked gets replaced by a need to be whole. When you realize peace is more valuable than popularity. That's not weakness, that's strength most people will never taste, because they're too busy chasing approval to chase truth. There will be moments in this season where nothing external will confirm what you're doing. No sign, no validation, just your spirit and God's whisper. That's when you'll want to quit. That's when you'll wonder if you're delusional. But that's also the point where most people stop and the few who don't break through. And once you break through, it's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about knowing you were right to listen, even when no one else did. That you were faithful to something bigger than your fears. That you trusted a vision no one else could see. So if you're in that place right now where everything is quiet, confusing, and painful, don't panic. That silence isn't absence. It's presence. It's alignment. It's the space where God starts placing new bricks: truth, integrity, identity, purpose. You just can't see the full structure yet. The loudest moves God makes often begin in silence. If you can sit in that silence without rushing back to comfort, you'll hear the next instruction. And when you follow it, you won't just rebuild, you'll evolve. You ever tried building something while still holding on to the wreckage of what broke you? It doesn't work. You can't rebuild a house while living in its ruins. And yet people do this emotionally every day. They drag the ashes into the next chapter, hoping the new structure will magically rise around the old pain. That's not how it works. God doesn't build on rubble. He builds on cleared ground. Which means before he lays a single brick, something's got to be let go. That's where the real war begins, not outside, but inside you. Letting go sounds simple. It's not. Letting go is violence in slow motion. It's the dismantling of attachments that once defined you. It's cutting ties with comfort that came from dysfunction. The version of you that God is rebuilding doesn't need what the broken version of you depended on. That person needed approval to feel worthy. That person needed revenge to feel powerful. That person needed chaos just to feel alive, but God's trying to build someone new and the old tools don't work in this new season. And here's the psychological twist, the very pain you say you want to be free from. A part of you is still addicted to it. There's familiarity and dysfunction. There's identity and suffering. And sometimes being healed feels more terrifying than being broken. Because at least when you're broken, you have a script. You know how to survive. But healing demands a rewrite. Healing demands that you step into the unknown and risk becoming someone you've never been before. Now people won't understand this kind of rebuilding. They'll ask why you're distant, why you're changing, why you're not reacting the way you used to. They'll think you've grown cold. But it's not coldness, it's clarity. You're not emotionally numb. You're just done rehearsing the same pain. You're tired of being loyal to things that betray you in the dark. That's not bitterness. That's self-respect finally waking up. God is a master of subtraction before multiplication. He'll remove people, habits, even dreams that once felt sacred because what's next requires space. And we hate that. We hate the pruning. But look closer. The greatest growth in your life never came through addition. It came through loss that led to clarity. It came through loneliness that gave birth to strength. It came through betrayal that unlocked discernment. That's the math of the divine. He subtracts to refine. When you're rebuilding with God, you start to realize how much dead weight you've been carrying. Obligations that weren't yours. Guilt that didn't belong to you. Relationships that drained your soul just to keep the illusion of connection. And when that weight finally drops, you don't feel lighter, not at first. You feel raw. You feel exposed. Because part of you wonders if you're being reckless. But over time, you'll see that emptiness wasn't destruction, it was preparation. See, we keep thinking God is rebuilding us for a comeback. But it's deeper than that. He's not interested in returning you to a former version of yourself. That would be regression. God rebuilds for transformation. He's not taking you back to where you were. He's taking you forward into who you were always meant to be. Before life distorted the blueprint. Before trauma rewired your instincts. Before fear became your compass. But you can't get there holding on to what broke you. You can't get there defending the version of you that survived but never thrived. At some point, you've got to release it, mourn it, bury it, and then walk limping if you have to toward something higher. And I know it feels like a betrayal to let go of what once meant everything. But holding on is the real betrayal of your future, your peace, your assignment. You can't be reborn while clinging to the coffin. So when God starts pulling things away, stop panicking. Don't chase after what He's removing. Trust the process. It's not rejection, it's redirection. And it's not punishment, it's alignment. You are not being dismantled, you are being redesigned. Release what's ending. Because until you do, what's meant to begin can't take root. And remember, God can't rebuild who you pretend to be. He can only rebuild who you're brave enough to become. You ever notice how we romanticize the comeback story, but we forget to talk about the confusion that comes in the middle of it? Everyone claps when you're rebuilt, but nobody sits with you when you're just dust. In between what was and what's becoming, there's this blurry middle, a psychological purgatory. And that's where most people give up. Not because they're weak, but because they're disoriented. Because what used to make sense no longer works, and what's next hasn't fully revealed itself. This is the part where God rebuilds you by stripping away your dependence on clarity. See, we've been conditioned to believe that certainty is strength, that having all the answers is the mark of control. But control is a myth sold to the insecure. In reality, transformation lives in ambiguity. God doesn't give you step-by-step instructions. He gives you fragments, whispers, impressions. And here's the twist that's intentional. Because if you could map it all out in advance, you'd never need faith. You'd just use logic. But rebuilding isn't logical, it's spiritual. It's emotional. It's psychological. People like to think faith is about belief in outcomes. It's not. Real faith is endurance when the outcome is invisible. It's choosing forward motion while every voice in your head is screaming, turn back. And the irony, that voice is trying to protect you. That's your survival instinct doing its job, telling you to stay where it's safe, familiar, predictable. But transformation requires betrayal of your comfort zone. It demands that you walk blindfolded through fire, trusting that what you can't see is still working in your favor. And in that blindness, something strange happens. You start hearing more. The noise of certainty fades, and suddenly your inner world becomes louder. The buried fears surface, the suppressed insecurities, the unhealed wounds. God's not ignoring you in this silence, He's using it as a mirror. Because to rebuild something lasting, you have to confront what broke you beneath the surface, not the event, the pattern, the identity you constructed in response to the pain. The silence is not punishment, it's precision. It's where God clears the clutter of voices you once depended on, voices that validated your self-doubt, voices that kept you small, voices that masked as support but secretly enjoyed your brokenness because it made them feel superior. And once those voices are gone, you're left with one, your own. That's where the real work begins. And let's be honest, most people avoid that work. They crave noise, distraction, chaos because stillness is terrifying. Stillness demands accountability. Stillness shows you the truth you've been running from. The truth that you've outgrown certain relationships. The truth that your self-image is outdated. The truth that you've been sabotaging your own rise just to keep from being alone. Silence doesn't lie. That's why it's sacred. God rebuilds you by deconstructing the illusion that you need everything figured out. And in doing so, He introduces you to something more powerful than answers: trust. Trust is what lets you keep moving when the floor is shifting. Trust is what anchors you when your emotions are screaming and your mind is spiraling. Trust is what separates those who are rebuilt from those who just decorate the ruins and call it progress. Let me make this clear: trust isn't passive. It's not sitting around hoping for magic. It's disciplined chaos. It's showing up to the assignment even when the reward is invisible. It's planting when there's no rain in sight. It's choosing purpose over proof. Because purpose doesn't always come with confirmation, it comes with contradiction. Think about it. Every time God rebuilds someone in scripture or history, it started with contradiction. Abraham was too old. Moses couldn't speak. David was overlooked. They all moved forward without guarantees. That's not delusion, that's divine design. Because God's process never begins with comfort. It begins with confusion that births character. So if you're in that space right now, the in-between, the gray zone, the void, don't run. Sit with it, listen in it, move inside of it. Because what feels like absence is actually presence disguised as pressure. You're not abandoned. You're being recalibrated. The silence you're hearing, that's not God ignoring you. That's God inviting you to hear yourself clearly, maybe for the first time. And once you do, you'll realize the blueprint isn't out there. It's always been inside you, buried under noise, waiting for the silence to bring it home. Here's the thing no one tells you about being rebuilt: before God puts new tools in your hands, He breaks the ones you used to depend on. Sounds cruel, doesn't it? But it's not. It's necessary. Because the very things that got you to survive your past are the exact things keeping you from stepping into your future. Coping mechanisms become cages. Defense systems become limitations. And the identity you built out of pain becomes obsolete the moment healing begins. That's where loss comes in. I'm not just talking about people or jobs. I mean the kind of loss that strips you of your labels, the titles, the roles, the illusion of control. God will allow what's not truly you to fall apart so the real you can finally breathe. That's the paradox of divine reconstruction. It starts with demolition. And here's where it gets uncomfortable: when your life feels like it's collapsing. It's not falling apart, it's falling apart. It's falling into alignment. But alignment doesn't always feel like advancement. Sometimes it feels like a regression, like failure, like punishment. That's the lie your ego tells you. because your ego confuses productivity with purpose. But God isn't trying to make you busy, He's trying to make you whole. And wholeness requires subtraction before multiplication. That's why God allows certain things to be removed. Not to hurt you, to reveal you. And I know we panic when things are removed. We think it's rejection. But sometimes God isn't rejecting you, He's rescuing you from the very thing you would have settled for. The friendship that masked your wounds instead of healing them. The job that validated your insecurities instead of challenging your growth. The relationship that loved the broken version of you but couldn't handle the healed one. That's the part people don't see, how grief can be divine. How absence can be intentional. See, most of us are addicted to identity based on pain. We wear our suffering like armor. We walk into rooms trying to prove we deserve to be there because somewhere along the way we were convinced we didn't. And so we chase success, validation, applause, all in the name of proving our worth. But when God starts rebuilding you, He doesn't just upgrade your life, He upgrades your sense of self. And to do that, He has to burn the scripts you've been performing from. And when those scripts burn, when the persona starts to fade, here comes the fear. Because who are you without the struggle? Who are you without the title? Without the trauma identity? That's the core question. That's the soul surgery. That's where the rebuilding begins. And it's not glamorous. It's not Instagrammable. It's quiet. It's raw. It's you staring in the mirror, realizing most of your strength came from survival mode. And now God's calling you into creation mode. And creation mode requires trust. Not trust in outcomes, trust in process. Trust that if God took it, He didn't need it to bless you. Trust that what feels like a setback is actually a sacred reset. And most importantly, trust that who you're becoming is far more powerful than who you were pretending to be. But that's not easy. Because letting go of the old you means letting go of the praise that came with them. It means accepting silence where there used to be applause. It means finding joy in internal validation rather than public recognition. That's the test. Can you still move forward when nobody's watching? Can you still evolve when evolution costs you your comfort? This is where most people tap out. Not because they're weak, but because they're still trying to build a new life with old materials. Still using doubt as a compass. Still trying to make their calling palatable to people who were never meant to understand it. But if God is rebuilding you, you don't need permission. You need courage. Courage to leave the familiar. Courage to disappoint expectations. Courage to rise messy, misunderstood, but real. Because authenticity will always cost you approval. But in exchange, you get freedom. And that's the trade most people avoid, but not you, not anymore. If you're hearing this, it's not by accident. It's because you're being summoned. Summoned to let go of what was and embrace what is. Not the version of you that people prefer, the version of you that was promised.